What's up, y'all? Death Lotus here. I'm back with another Eversoul video. I did my review on Eversoul a few months ago, and I'm still playing the game every day. If you like, you can see my review and thoughts on the game. I have it in the description down below. But in my review, I had mentioned that I would like to do some guides on Eversoul, and have some ideas that could potentially help new players, returning players, or for those who are already playing, could attain some knowledge from my experience and opinions on the game as well. Now, onto the topic at hand. One of the most pressing questions that many players have when starting off, or when getting further into the game, would be, who are some potential souls that I should be focusing on? This question is deliberately broad in scope, and it covers many other questions that players may have. I'll be going over who those souls are, and what they're capable of. I'll also be going over what are their strengths and weaknesses. I'll also be rating them based on PvE, single target boss raid encounters, and PvP. When starting in any gacha game, we all want to know the potential of the souls that we are pulling in the gacha. No one wants an inferior soul that they invested time and resources on. Let's be real. Many of us want to know the strengths, weakness, and potential in the later part of the game for the souls that we want to play with. And of course, there are those who just don't care and play solely to pick up waifus. Throw them in the party and be on their merry way. And that's perfectly fine. I mean, it's a possibility in Eversoul. I think most of those players already understand that, with that logic, there is a potential that their party will not be progressing as fast as someone who would care about their party synergy and formation. So I don't think much else needs to be said about that. Now, I could make a super long video, but as it is, the video is already going to be long. So to make things short, I'm going to categorize the sequence of guides based on types. Now for the vets, or for those of you who are looking for a more TLDR approach, I've created some timestamps that'll guide you to the questions or answers that you're looking for. And I'm sure some of you who are new to the game are a bit confused by some of my terminology I just used, like souls and types. So let me clarify. Souls are the, quote, characters, playable units, heroes, what have you. They are the characters you have control over and can power up, basically. Types can be described as races or factions. It's basically the category that souls fall into place, and this has a significant impact when formulating a party due to the party formation buffs. Now, party formation's something I'll be going over in another video simply because I just want to keep this guide short. In this guide, we will be learning about the fairy types. I'll be going over who are the best souls to focus on in the fairy types for long-term use, the strengths and weaknesses of each fairy soul, and my opinions who you should focus on if you are interested in some of the fairy souls. For order of importance, I'm going to talk about the more prominent fairies and descend down to the sort of mediocre souls, so to speak. With that being said, I believe that there are no useless souls in Eversoul. Every soul has their time to shine, whether it's in PvE 5v5 stages, a single target boss raid, or in PvP. Some souls just help more with content than others. Now, a little disclaimer is that I have limited knowledge on PvP, but I have a decent understanding on who has potential to shine in it. I do approach PvP casually compared to the PvE content in the game, so just keep that in mind with my PvP rankings. Alright, now on to the meat of the subject. Considering that we're going into the order of importance, and we're starting with the most important, we're going to start off with the best fairy damage dealers. Man, this was so hard to come to a final conclusion on who is the most useful and good all-around damage dealer for fairies, and I have to give the spotlight to Vivienne. I think Vivienne is definitely the best damage dealer for fairies, bar none. A couple of things to note about Vivienne is the fact that she not only can fill the role of a damage dealer, but she can also fill the role of a supportive damage dealer as well, which is the reason why she's ranked number 1 for me as far as the best fairy soul. She is a caster geared towards the intelligence type, meaning that she can only equip intelligence keepsakes. Being that she's a caster, she's squishy. She's one of the few souls that can actually cast from max range. There are other souls of the same type that are at range, but not necessarily max. Now, this is a benefit, but also a detriment, depending on the enemy soul's formation. So a quick explanation of Vivienne, how she plays, is that Vivienne only has 2 attacks. One being her main attack and the other being her ultimate. She does also have a sub-ability that acts as an attack, but it's more like a buff for your ally that she just throws on the furthest ally away from her. The rest of her kit just revolves around basically her main attack. It consists of her passively getting mana back quicker. She also increases her speed and the speed of her allies, which is really big, by the way. And at the same time by also boosting her damage. And then her artifact returns mana for each time that she uses her main attack. So all this stuff just kind of synergizes perfectly with her main attack. For however many Windblade buffs you have, your ultimates can do more damage. So she kind of ramps up over time, kind of like Souls, like Renee and Violet, just at more shorter terms, basically. She can ramp up her damage pretty quickly. So there's more to talk about with Vivienne, but again, I want to try to keep this video short, and I can go into more deeper analysis and other souls in a future video. Now onto her pros and cons. So some pros are that, of course, Vivienne fits in the supportive role and the damage dealing role. So in case you don't like the way she works out, she could always in the future just fill in the supportive role. Now with the way her kit works, she does a considerable amount of damage based on how many Windblades she has due to her main attack, and then her ultimate sort of synergizes with that as well. And let's not forget the fact that she improves all of her allies' speed, which is one of the most recognizable things about Vivienne. And basically what this translates to is your allies are going to be able to get their main attacks and more mana due to the increase in speed. And as for the cons, it has to do with her attacks. The fact that her attacks aren't global AoEs. Her main attack is a line AoE, and her ultimate is a vicinity AoE. So most of the time she's going to be targeting the tank, which is again one of the downsides. If you're fighting like a solo tank or something like that, she's going to have trouble hitting the back line because of her line AoE and her vicinity AoE targeting the nearest enemy. The other thing is she doesn't have a hard crowd control. And what I mean by that is she doesn't have a stun, a silence, or a sleep that inhibits the souls from performing actions. Her ultimate does have a knockdown, but knockdowns are very minimal as far as crowd control. Souls are up and running within like seconds. The final con is the fact that her damage does have to ramp up. So she doesn't start off strong, and she's also pretty weak early on until you get her artifact ascended and her leveled up until she can hit that magic 5 stacks of the Windblade buff. But she's definitely not as bad as other souls that ramp up due to buffs that are required for them to basically pop off. So that's it for pros and cons. Let's go on to the rating. For PvE, I have to give Vivienne a 4 out of 5 stars. She does a considerable amount of damage. She doesn't have a hard crowd control via stun or sleep, but she makes up for that with her speed boost and her supportive capabilities while also dishing out some good damage. Now for my rating for single target or boss encounters, I would have to say that she's a 5 out of 5. I believe that Vivienne brings a lot to boss raids due to the fact that she provides everyone a speed boost, and also with the way her kit works and how she ramps up her damage over time. Bosses are multi-HP stages in Eversoul, meaning that boss encounters are quite long. That damage ramp up comes off pretty good, and also her ultimate does a ton of damage as well because of how many Windblade buffs that Vivienne can stack up. Now for my PvP rating, I want to preface that, again, PvP is something I generally don't care too much about in Eversoul, but I have an understanding of how souls function in PvP. So for PvP, I'm going to give Vivienne a 4 out of 5. The whole speed boost that she gives everyone, and the fact it does a good amount of damage based on her Windblade is enough to make her viable for PvP. Overall, I feel like Vivienne just is a very well-rounded soul, and definitely deserves the spotlight of being number 1 for fairy types. Now on to our next soul, and this is where I had said earlier that this was really hard for me to formulate who was going to go first and who was going to go second as far as damage dealers, because I feel that this soul can carry you so far in the game. based on just the majority of what the content actually is in Eversoul. And that's 5v5 PvE battle encounters. Whether it's the battlefronts, which is the main content in the game, or whether it's the challenges, which house the unlimited gates and the type gates, which again are 5v5 battle encounters. Then there's also the dungeons, which consist of the Dimensional Labyrinth and the Hall of Memories. The soul that I'm talking about is none other than Naiah. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I am a huge simp for Naiah. I've used this soul for the majority of my time playing the game, and she has carried me so freaking far as a main damage dealer. That's not to say that she can't be a supportive damage dealer, because she can fit that role as well. But let's get into the details of Naiah. So first off, Naiah is a caster with the gear type of being intelligence. For casting type, I had mentioned that Vivienne was a max range caster. Well, Naiah is what I consider mid-range. So what I mean by that is that Naiah has to take a few steps forward before she begins casting. Now, an overview of how her kit works is that Naiah's main skill attacks the enemy with the highest attack and does a decent amount of damage and has the potential of sleeping them for 4 to 6 seconds, albeit at a 50% chance. It's also a vicinity AoE that applies the same potential of sleeping those souls. Her ultimate is an AoE that hits all targets. It also does a good amount of damage and puts the enemies to sleep for up to 6 seconds. Her passive also induces sleep based on how many times she's attacked that soul with normal attacks. Now onto her sub-abilities. One of them, attacking the soul with the highest attack, of course, deals a decent amount of damage, but it's mainly meant for the sleep. The sleep has a 50% chance of proccing and sleeps up to 6 seconds. The second sub-ability also attacks a soul with the highest attack, and instead of sleeping the target, it actually absorbs HP back to Naiah. And of course we can't forget about her artifact. And the way her artifact works is that whenever she's hit, she gets mana back and goes untargetable and cannot be hit for the duration of the passive. At higher artifact levels, this also induces a sleep to enemy souls that are within the vicinity. So what this translates to is that Naiah is a crowd control god, and the best one at it. She has the potential of sleeping souls up to 10 to 14 seconds depending on how the stage progresses. The other thing to note is the way the sleep works. Unlike other games, where sleep is interrupted when someone attacks that enemy, in Eversoul, slept targets do not wake up. So it basically acts like a stun, without actually being a stun. So now let's get into the pros and cons of Naiah. For pros, Naiah is again a crowd control god, potentially sleeping targets for a very long time. Buying your allies numerous seconds to accumulate more mana or to dish out more damage to enemies while they're slept. Her artifact is extremely strong as well. It has the potential to counter many souls in the game because of the fact that she cannot be targeted while her Veil of Dreams is procced, and she doesn't take any damage. Meaning that in certain situations, Naiah is the perfect candidate for getting hit by line AoEs or countering assassins who jump to the back line and target Naiah. Well, she puts them to sleep, buying your team time to target that enemy and dispose of them. With the way her attacks work, she has the potential of targeting souls on the enemy team who have the highest attack, which generally means the carries of the enemies. So what this means is that she's basically a caster with assassin potential, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. She comfortably sits in the back line while pelting the backline units on the enemy team. Now for cons, we'll start with her damage potential. I think that Naiah lacks a bit of damage because there's going to be moments where you're going to need someone who does actually more damage. The other thing is, half of her sleeps are RNG based, which means that you're going to be refreshing a lot of stages just trying to get those perfect sleeps. So because of that, that could be infuriating to some players to have to deal with some of that RNG. The final con with Naiah has to be that, well, she only really excels in 5v5 stages where there's multi-targets. I would say anything more than 3 targets is where she shines, but other than that, anything less than that and she just falls behind, which means bosses, Naiah is practically worthless. Now for ratings, I would have to give Naiah in the PvE category a 5-star. Considering what I said earlier, she excels extremely well in 5v5 stages, and that's the majority of the content in this game. Naiah can carry your team as a main damage dealer or a supportive damage dealer because of the amount of crowd control that she has. Couple that with a really strong artifact, and you got yourself a really strong kit for PvE. It's so bloody close, dude. Oh, she got it. Yeah, boy. For single target or boss encounters, well, I'd have to give my dear old Naiah a 1 out of 5. Many bosses in Eversoul are just crowd control immune, or they're only affected by stuns, and considering that sleep isn't considered a stun, or Naiah just isn't that great in bosses, unfortunately. As for PvP, considering that there are no ultimates being used in PvP, I believe that Naiah also falls pretty short in PvP as well, so I would have to give Naiah a 3 out of 5. PvP is definitely not something that you want to RNG sleeps on, and her damage potential is hindered by the fact that she doesn't have her ultimate, and she has to rely on her main attack and her sub ability, which deal a moderate amount of damage to begin with. Her artifact still comes in handy though, but it's not enough to shine in PvP. So that's Naiah. In a nutshell, she's a really good PvE 5v5 stage progression soul, and she has the potential to carry you through the majority of the content in the game. I've been using her since almost the beginning of the game, and I still use her now. And I'm currently at chapter 2155, which is the maximum that I can go to in the battlefronts. Now I know I had much more to say about Naiah than I did with Vivienne, but it's only because Naiah's a very complicated soul to talk about because of the way her kit works and the potential that she has. She's so versatile in 5v5 stages. It's pretty crazy, honestly. I spent a lot of time talking about Vivienne and Naiah only because I feel like these two souls are quintessential damage dealers for fairies. That's not to say that the other damaging souls don't have the same potential, but I just feel like Vivienne and Naiah just have more of an impact compared to the other souls. So we're going to move on to talking about the best tank, followed by the best support. And I am going to talk a little less about these souls, mainly because damage dealers initially are more important than tanks and supports. So for tanks, well, this is really easy because there's currently only one main tank for fairies currently, which is Chloe. Chloe is an incredibly tanky soul. She falls under the defender category, and her gear types is towards strength. A brief description of her kit is that her main attack basically stuns everyone around her. Her ultimate also knocks everyone down and stuns them as well. However, you'll never be using a tank's ultimate. Now, the bread and butter of Chloe is her passive and how her artifact coincides with her passive. So basically what happens is Chloe gets to a low percentage threshold, which procs a physical resist and magic resist buff while also recovering HP. And coinciding with her artifact gives her a shield, depending on what the artifact level is. And at Legendary Plus in Origin, she gets mana returned to her when the passive procs, which is incredibly good for her pulling off her AoE stun quickly. And it buys Chloe precious time to recover her HP when all the melee souls around her are stunned, basically. As for sub-abilities, one of them grants her extra defense and gives her crowd control immunity while also taunting enemies for a short duration, and she gets this taunt off pretty quickly, actually. The other sub-ability basically yeets someone in the air and reduces their attack, which is hilarious to see, but it actually does help out quite a bit if she hits the right target. All in all, Chloe has a really good tanking kit that basically has crowd control immunity for a short period of time, defense boosting, damage down, and her artifact and passive basically give her a sort of second life, so to speak. Alright, so let's get to the pros and cons. So we'll start off with the pros, being that Chloe's actually pretty easy to ascend compared to other tank souls. Mainly because you actually get a free copy of her early in the game, and you can purchase her as well in the arena shop, which is amazing, and basically guaranteeing that you're going to get her to Origin, bypassing the gacha. The other pro is that she is what I consider to be the best tank in the game. Single tank, I should say, because of the whole cheat death mechanic that Chloe has. She has the potential to be the only tank which lets you basically put in another DPS or another support soul without having to worry about putting in a secondary tank of sorts. Because basically Chloe can do it by herself if you invest in her. The final pro would be her taunt. Her taunt is, as far as I know, the only taunt that's in the game that hits all targets and can be used right away compared to other tanks. Now for cons, because Chloe wants all the attention via her taunt, this means that, well, she's going to receive all that attention, so all the enemies are going to be attacking her, which means that you're going to need dupes of her and resources for her to be able to tank all that damage that she's going to be receiving. Now, after her taunt goes away, obviously you can have someone else, take the damage as well. But it's also something that all tanks have to worry about anyways. The final con that I can think of would be probably Chloe's damage. Chloe doesn't have that much damage potential. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, of course, because she's a tank. Like, why would she be doing damage? There are tanks that actually can do damage and do a decent job at tanking. However, Chloe just has the tanking capability, she just doesn't have the damage capability. And in single target boss fight encounters or PvP, it's very important to be able to tank while also dealing a good amount of damage. So my rating for Chloe in PvE is a 5 out of 5. And the majority of the content that you're going to be using Chloe in, she's going to do a very good job in clearing a bunch of stages that are 5v5 battlefronts and towers. My rating for her single target or boss fight encounters would have to be a 2 out of 5. And it's only because what I had said earlier, that she sort of falls off as far as damage is concerned. And the only real thing that she provides in these encounters are just her stun. There's no point in taunting, there's no point in tanking most of the times of these boss fights due to the fact that they're just DPS checks. And well, Chloe just falls short on damage. My rating for PvP for Chloe would have to be a 3 out of 5. I think Chloe's still good in PvP. It's just the fact that she doesn't do a lot of damage to begin with is what kind of hinders her. So you need a frontline soul that can defend and also deal damage. So that's my rating for her on PvP. So that's it for the best defender, aka tank. Obviously there's only one currently in the fairy category. So let's move on to support. Fairies have two supportive souls in the roster, and that's Talia and Erika. One I feel that is the most prominent is going to be Talia. Talia is considered a supporter, of course, with her gear type being intelligence. She is also what I consider a low-range caster of sorts. She's not considered a caster, but still, she does attack from range. It's not melee range, it's not mid-range like Naiah, and it's not max range like Vivienne, but she sits right behind the tanks basically because of her low range that she has. Now, Talia may seem like a simple support soul to many people, but if you look more in depth, she's actually pretty complicated in regards to how you play her. Most people, I think, choose her as a support soul and generally don't ascend her very high, which is the way that I approach Talia. And then there's those that prioritize her ultimate for damage dealing capabilities, and she does a really good job at it actually. So how Talia works is her main ability is a heal over time. We're also providing your allies with a mana recovery and removing up to 2 debuffs as well. Then we have her ultimate, which is basically like her main heal. This time recovers less mana, but the big thing is that she attacks all enemies and knocks them down. Now you couple that with her artifact, And this is where some people choose to use Talia's ultimate over, let's say, a damage dealer's ultimate, because it not only provides more damage, but at origin it also provides a stun as well. So this is why Talia can be played in two different styles. If you're going to be prioritizing Talia's ultimate, then you're going to obviously have to ascend her very far in order to take advantage of the stat increases from being ascended and leveling up. As for the rest of her kit, she has a passive that increases all of her allies' attack and defense. Nothing much to touch up on that. She has a sub-ability that actually attacks the nearest enemy in a cone and blinds them. And this actually comes in pretty clutch, especially when you got like hard-hitting souls and you position Talia to be able to hit one or two of them and give you that RNG of possibly missing their attacks. For example, Adrian is a perfect candidate for Talia's blind. This prevents Adrian from pulling one of your allies to her. And then her final sub-ability basically grants one of your allies who is furthest away a shield while also rejuvenating their HP and giving them a little bit of defense. This is great for either backline assassins or even your tanks. So that's Talia's kit in a nutshell. As you can see, she's a really good supportive soul and nothing to scoff at. She heals over time. She's the only mana battery currently in the game. She also provides allies with shields, blinds enemies. She removes a few debuffs from your allies, and she has a pretty meaty ultimate if you decide to use it and invest into it. Now for the pros and cons, we'll start with a pro and con, which is Talia basically being able to be a carry for your party. If you want to invest in her Ascension and her artifact, she could be the ultimate carry of the team and take you pretty far because of that. Now that could also be a con because that is also taking resources away from an actual damage dealing carry. Now the con of that is the fact that her ultimate is an AoE and it does a lot of damage, but it's only beneficial in PvE. In single target boss raids and in PvP, well, you don't use a support's ultimate due to the fact that there are many other souls that have just a better damage dealing ultimate. In PvP, ultimates are disabled to begin with. That's the downside of focusing Talia as being the main ultimate carry. On the other spectrum, not focusing on ascending Talia will save you many resources and allow you to ascend souls to higher levels, but at the same time, the con of that is that Talia is going to be squishy just like other support souls. Being that she's a low range caster of sorts, Talia is susceptible to taking a lot of damage from ground AoEs, line AoEs, and whatever else is targeting your main tank. So that covers a pro and con. Let's go over her pros specific, which is the fact that Talia is currently the only mana battery in the game. And that in and of itself is really huge because that mana that she provides is insanely good. Another pro is that Talia also provides a lot of buffs and survivability for her team via shields or a passive defense boost and attack buff. She's consistently buffing and healing souls with her skill set. As for cons, I honestly can't think of any other than the ones that I described earlier, which is she could be resource hungry because of the dupes and fodder that you need to ascend her further. But that's only based on whether you're going to be focusing her ultimate and if you want to give her a little bit of survivability. Now on to Talia's ratings. I think I've said my piece on Talia, so I don't have to go into detail about my rankings here, so I'll just go on about and tell you what I think about her. In PvE, I'm giving Talia a 5-star rating. In single target encounters or boss raids, so I'm going to give Talia a 5-star in boss raids. In PvP, Talia also is going to get a 5-star. She also comes in pretty clutch in PvP as well. So she's like not really a perfect soul, but man, she's a really good supportive soul for fairies and other party formations. That about wraps it up for Talia. I had mentioned that we were going in the order of importance for fairies, based on who I believe should be your choice damage dealers, your choice tank, and your supportive fairy. So those are my top 4 choices, and now we're going to be talking about the remaining fairy types, which leaves us with 5 left. Now, a little disclaimer, some of these souls have had some changes over the months of Eversoul's launch, and unfortunately, many players, and including myself, have not had enough time with these souls and the new changes to be able to determine whether these souls are capable of carrying your team throughout your playtime of Eversoul. So I'm not going to spend too much time going into detail about them, so it's going to be sort of a quick TLDR. We'll start off by talking about Miriam. Miriam is considered a ranger. Her gear type is dexterity, and she excels at single target damage. So the way Miriam works is that she's got these magic bullets that she gets by using her sub-abilities, and after attaining 7 magic bullets, you can use her main attack, which guarantees a critical hit at higher levels. One of her sub-abilities also guarantees a crit, while also decreasing the target's defense by 15% for 8 seconds. Another sub-ability decreases the target's attack for 8 seconds at 15%. And then the final sub-ability gives her 3 magic bullets that improves her attack damage for 10 seconds. And then her ultimate also provides her with more magic bullets and mana and does a ton of damage. It is her only AoE that hits targets in a wide line. So all this coincides with her main attack, where I had mentioned when she gets 7 stacks, which is the max amount of stacks that you can get for Miriam, it guarantees a critical hit and does a ton of damage. Now the other wonderful thing about Miriam is her artifact. Her artifact, for each normal attack that she does, she applies a physical resist down for 9 seconds. And as you rank up her artifact, this physical resist down improves, and she also starts getting a crit damage decrease as well. And this actually benefits all your allies. The physical resist down and the crit damage increase. Actually, let me reword that. It's not really a crit damage increase. It's a debuff that increases the incoming crit damage on that specific soul. So it's good to have souls that are physical damage dealers coupled with Miriam. Now on to the pros and cons. Starting with pros. So Miriam is a excellent single target damage dealer, meaning that she's great for raid bosses, and she's somewhat decent in PvP. She's excellent at taking out frontline enemies that are either warriors or strikers, but she has a hard time killing the tanks, even though she's got that meaty artifact. And that's it for pros. Let's go on to cons. Well, at higher CP deficits, when enemy souls become more difficult to kill and get higher levels, Miriam's damage also falls short due to the fact that tanks start to get more defense and HP, and her main ability just doesn't do enough damage to be able to, well, either one-shot them or get them close to half HP. The other con being that because she focuses the nearest enemy, she cannot focus the backline souls, and typically the frontline carries like Aki or Lindsay and whatnot. Usually she doesn't target those souls because the tanks are in the forefront. Then the other con is that for the most part, you're going to have to manual play Miriam a lot because the AI isn't actually good at gauging when she's gotten her 7 magic bullets. So this means in PvP, well, she's not going to do too well because of the nature of PvP and how it's all autoplay and you cannot use your main abilities when you want to. So as long as there's someone who could possibly interrupt her, there's a good chance that she's not going to get her 7 magic bullets off and dish out that sweet guaranteed critical damage that she's supposed to do. So that's it for the pros and cons. Let's move on to the ratings now. For PvE, I'm going to give Miriam a 2 out of 5. The reason I give her such a low rating is because she doesn't pop off until she's like 181 when she's getting that guaranteed critical hit from her main ability. And due to the fact that you're going to have to manual play her quite often, and she single targets the tank for the most part, you might be able to get away with it early on, but definitely not late game. For single target and raid encounters, I'd have to give Miriam a 4 out of 5. She does a really good job in single target encounters. She's worth slotting in with souls like Aki, Lindsay, basically anyone who's got physical damage, so that way you could bring out the best in those souls because of her artifact shredding physical defense and applying that receive crit damage increase. So she's treated more like a supportive damage dealer for the most part in raids. My rating for PvP is a little difficult to gauge because if Miriam is uninterrupted, she can get her 7 magic bullets to do a ton of damage. But of course that's all based on whether or not the enemy PvP team is just gonna interrupt her sub-abilities and prevent her from getting those 7 magic bullets. So though I'd have to give her a 3 out of 5, just kind of in the middle, but it's really dependent on whether or not she's being attacked and interrupted by enemy souls. Since there's no way to manual play in PvP, it's all autoplay. So that's Miriam. Let's move on to Nicole. Nicole is another ranger, fallen in the gear type of dexterity. She actually specializes in AoE. Nicole is also one of those souls that I had mentioned before that has received some changes that changes her quite significantly compared to how she used to play when the game initially launched. So unfortunately, the community, including myself, have not had enough time to figure out how well Nicole does now early game and mid game. Late game, she seems to be doing really good though now. So let's quickly go into Nicole's kit. Before we get into Nicole's main ability, we need to understand her sub-abilities because there's one important sub-ability that plays into her damage, and that's her Sharp Feather, which applies the Feather Brand debuff. So how the sub-ability Sharp Feather works is that she shoots off a conal AoE and hits targets in an 8 meter long range, applies an evasion down debuff, and ignores 20% of the target's defense as well, while applying the Featherbrand debuff, which plays into her artifact. What the artifact does is it applies a received crit damage increase debuff to all targets hit by Featherbrand. It also restores 1,000 mana to Nicole, and at higher artifact levels, she gets a passive speed increase, and I got a little confused when I read this the first time. I thought this only applied when she used her Sharp Feather sub-ability. But no, after some testing, I figured out that she passively just gets 12% speed at Legendary plus Artifact. And at Origin, it goes up to 20%. Another important thing about her kit is her passive. Her passive basically makes Nicole incapable of missing. She gets a large amount of accuracy, and her attacks also ignore a percentage of defense. And this also coincides with the rest of her kit. The rest of her kit also ignores a percentage of defense with each sub-ability, main ability, and ultimate. So now that we've gone over the main part of her kit, let's finish off the rest of her skills. So her main ability does AoE damage around the nearest target. If the target is affected by Featherbrand, it deals additional damage and ignores defense. Then her final sub-ability that we haven't gone over targets the enemy nearest to Nicole and does a wide line AoE to all targets and deals additional damage depending if they have the Featherbrand effect, while also ignoring defense. And then her ultimate targets the nearest enemy and attacks all targets within the area of that enemy and applies the Featherbrand effect, and also ignoring the target's defense by percent. So to sum it up, she is an AoE soul that does a lot of AoE damage to the nearest target. She's also very accurate, and her attacks ignore a percentage of defense on targets. She's also capable of applying a received crit damage increase debuff on all enemies that are hit by her Featherbrand. So she plays very differently than what she did play like initially when Eversoul launched, due to the fact that they've now applied a additional Featherbrand debuff with her ultimate, considering that she gets mana back when using her Sharp Feather. Basically lets Nicole apply the Featherbrand far more frequently than before for your allies to take advantage of. Now, let's get into the pros and cons. Starting with the pros. Nicole is an excellent, accurate backline soul that's a specialist in AoE targets who are grouped up. She's great at countering heavy-hitting souls that deal a lot of damage to the tank, like Ira, Lindsay, Aki, Renee, souls like that. Another pro is that Nicole's a great supportive damage dealer that applies that much-needed incoming critical damage debuff to all enemies that were hit by Featherbrand. Now for cons, as you may have guessed it, because she is an AoE specialist, this also means that she suffers in damage during single target or boss raid encounters. She's only capable of dishing out a moderate amount of damage when there's at least 3 or more enemies grouped up. The final con has to be the fact that Nicole shares the fairy type, and there's already 2 extremely good AoE souls, which is Naiah and Vivienne. Now onto the ratings. For PvE, I'm going to give Nicole a 4 out of 5. She does a good job at taking out the frontline enemy souls. And considering that most of the content in Eversoul is 5v5 stage progressions, I think she's pretty strong in this category. My rating for her in single target or boss raid encounters would have to be a measly 2 out of 5. And it's of course because she doesn't excel at single target damage dealing, and really the only thing that she brings to boss raids is her increase to incoming crit damage that she applies. Now it's a little hard for me to rate her in PvP just because I don't have a whole lot of experience with her in PvP, but from seeing her kit, she doesn't seem to be having too much of an issue, but at the same time I feel like there's just better souls to slot in, so I'm gonna have to give her a 3 out of 5. I think that about sums up my thoughts on Nicole, so let's move on to the next soul. That soul being Manon. Manon is a caster with the gear type of intelligence, and she specializes in AoE. Now, Manon's a fairly new soul that just came out last month from the time of this video, and unfortunately I don't have a lot of playtime with her, so a lot of my opinions are going to be based on just her kit and just my general thoughts of what I think about her kit. So let's go over Manon's kit. Manon is a sort of a luck of the draw type soul, just like how Jade plays, and another soul that I will be speaking about shortly, which is Erika. We'll start off by talking about the main mechanic, which is her lucky investment. That is a sub ability. What she does is she draws out 3 lucky coins, which each has a chance to proc a permanent 10% crit rate that can stack up to 5 times. And her artifact also plays on this sub-ability, which gives her a buff, which increases her crit damage for 20 seconds and restores mana. At higher artifact investment, the crit damage increases per upgrade. At Legendary Plus, she gets a speed plus 20%, and at Origin, she restores HP. This of course means that if she gets lucky, she can quickly get a permanent 50% crit rate increase, while also increasing her crit damage. These lucky coins also play a pivotal part in how the rest of her abilities work out. For example, Manon's ultimate deals damage to the furthest enemy and to all targets in a 3.5 meter range around them. Deals additional damage depending on how many lucky coin stacks you have. And at 3 lucky coin buffs, she stuns all targets for 3 seconds. She also has another sub-ability that benefits from these coin buffs, which targets the furthest enemy and deals damage based on how many stacks of lucky coins that she has. If she has 3 or more lucky coin buffs, the target gets stunned for 2 seconds. The final sub-ability plays in how much damage her main ability does, and what this sub-ability does is Manon shoots out ink in an 80-degree angle in front of her that applies an attack, defense, and heal and receive buff to all allies who were hit by this. This buff also applies to Manon, which also triggers her main ability's additional damage. What her main ability does is she shoots a wide line AoE to the furthest enemy and deals additional damage if she has the magic ink buff. At higher levels, it adds an effect that removes 1 buff from a target. So to sum it all up, Manon is a luck of the draw soul that specializes in dealing damage to the furthest enemy in the backline. Her damage is all dependent on these lucky coins and whether or not you can stack the lucky coins as quickly as possible. So that's Manon in a nutshell. Let's move on to the pros and cons. Starting with pros. First pro being that she prioritizes the enemy that's furthest away, meaning that's going to be one of the carries, or possibly even a healer. She has the potential of having really good damage to take care of the backline. Then the other pro is that she's got a really good buff. 20% defense, attack, and heal and received is nothing to scoff at. With that being said, let's move on to cons, and one of the cons being that the buffs that she applies is in a conal AoE, meaning that souls in the backline with her are typically not going to be getting hit by this, and only melee souls. The final con has to be the RNG mechanics that she has. She has the potential of doing a lot of damage, but she also has the potential of not doing a lot of damage because of the lucky coin buff that she relies heavily on to do the extra damage and apply the extra status effects that are hidden behind this. That's it for pros and cons, so let's quickly go through my ratings. For PvE, I'm gonna have to give Manon a 3 out of 5. I don't think that Manon is a particularly bad soul, I'm just not a big fan of her RNG mechanics. Albeit my favorite soul is Naiah, but at least Naiah's sleep is far more consistent at a 50% chance. Whereas Manon, we have to RNG 3 individual coin tosses. Now my rating for her in single target or boss raid encounters would have to be a 2 out of 5. I've personally never used Manon in boss raids, and I feel that her damage falls off quite significantly compared to single target souls that specialize in this field. And then for PvP, I'd have to give her a 1 out of 5. That's because you don't want to RNG in PvP. In PvP, you're incapable of retrying stages, and if you do retreat from battle, it's considered a loss. This is the main reason why RNG gimmicky souls are not sought after. Even though I feel that the buff is good for PvP, it's still not enough to justify the lucky coin RNG. Alright, I think that's about it for Manon, so let's talk about the next soul, which is Erika. Erika is the other support soul in the fairy types. Her gear type is Intelligence. She is a max range caster or attacker. This means that she shares the same range as Vivienne. For supportive souls, this is very important because there's actually only 2 max range support souls currently in the game, which is Prim and Erika. So let's quickly go over Erika's skills. Erika's another RNG driven soul to the likes of Manon and Naiah. Because of that, we're going to go over her sub-ability called Erika. What Erika does is Erika creates a potion that has a chance of getting Erika 1 or Erika 3. She also gets an attack buff from using this sub-ability. Erika is the key component as to how the rest of her abilities function. The other important thing to her kit is her artifact and how it also provides additional benefits depending on how far you've got the artifact ascended to. So how Erika's artifact works is that anytime she uses her Erika sub-ability, she gets mana back. She also gets a buff into her speed, and anytime Erika uses her 2 heals, which is Magnum Opus and Giant Potion, it removes 2 debuffs from the target. That's the short gist of it. There is more to her artifact, but I'll get to that once I get to the rest of her abilities. So Erika's main ability, which is one of her heals, targets the lowest HP ally and all allies within 2.5 meters. Depending if she's got Erika 1 or 3, Erika 1 restores more HP, while Erika 3 provides a barrier. What's important to note is if she does get Erika 3, Erika 1 is also counted, meaning that she's going to have Erika 1 and 3. The same applies to the rest of her abilities. Erika's ultimate is an AoE heal that restores HP to all allies. At Erika 1 procs a damage immunity for a short time, and Erika 3 gives all allies attack for 10 seconds. Erika's final heal is a sub-ability named Giant Potion. Erika targets a single low HP ally and heals them. At Erika 1, she increases that target's physical and magical resistance by a set amount, and at Erika 3, she recovers more HP. Now that we've gone over her heals, let's revisit Erika's artifact. So Giant Potion gets an additional effect due to Erika's artifact, which removes 2 debuffs from a healed ally, and Magnum Opus, her main ability, also gets this same benefit of removing 2 debuffs from all allies within the vicinity of the heal. Her final sub-ability is Poisonous Potion, which is her only attack. What this does is she targets the enemy who's furthest away, deals initial damage, and then poisons them for 10 seconds. At Erika 1, it reduces the enemy's attack for 10 seconds, and at Erika 3, it reduces the defense of the enemy for 10 seconds. Her artifact at Legendary Plus adds a bonus effect, which removes 2 buffs from the target. The final thing to note about Erika's artifact is that each time it gets ascended, her speed increases, and it increases quite significantly. At Origin, her Erika buff gets an additional attack increase. Hopefully that wasn't too hard to follow along. The gist of it is, Erika relies on these RNG Erika procs to further assist her in her supportive capabilities. She's packed with a bunch of utilities, like attack downs, defense downs, attack boosts for your allies, physical and magical resistance buff for your allies, and a very strong damage immunity from her ultimate. So that's the overview of her abilities, and let's get into her pros and cons. And oh boy, do I got a lot to say about her. So one of the pros is that she is a max range attacker / caster, which puts her in a really good position to stay away from most attacks in the game. Unlike Talia, who is more of a low range attacker, Talia is susceptible to more ground AoEs or line AoEs, that target the tank, and unfortunately Talia gets in the crossfire of those quite frequently. The other pro is that Erika has a pretty good kit for burst healing, single target, or bunched up souls. Now, for the cons, her only AoE heal that targets everyone is her ultimate. This means if the enemies have a lot of AoE damage dealing souls, Erika's gonna have a really hard time in picking everyone back up. The other con is the fact that she is another gimmicky RNG soul, just like Manon and Naiah. So you're going to have to be retrying stages to hopefully get a better proc of the Erika buff. The final con is sort of a pro as well, I guess you could say, but it has to do with their ultimate. The damage immunity lasting for 5 seconds is freaking crazy. That means for 5 seconds no one's is taking any damage whatsoever. And although it's extremely strong, but also it's the downside of it. The downside is it's tied to the ultimate, and usually you don't want to use a support soul's ultimate over a damage dealing soul's. So that's it for pros and cons. Let's move on to her rating. For PvE, I'm gonna have to give Erika a 3 out of 5. She's still a pretty good healer. However, she's got some stiff competition because of Talia being a fairy type as well. So you're gonna have to choose between Talia and Erika, and unfortunately, Erika just comes short compared to Talia, in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, she actually comes in pretty clutch in some situations as well because of her max range, so, you know, don't hang up the coat real quick with Erika, she still comes in handy. For single target and boss raid encounters, I'd have to give Erika a 3 out of 5. I've used her plenty of times in boss raids, but she still has that difficulty in healing groups of allies because of the nature of her heals and how her only AoE heal is her ultimate. Speaking of ultimate, Erika's damage immunity has come in clutch twice for me in boss raids, but unfortunately that's not enough to give her a higher rank. As for my PvP rating, I'd have to give her a 3 out of 5 as well. She's not completely useless in PvP, but she's definitely not someone I would use in my party. There's already other support souls that just do a better job at overall healing and supplying buffs for allies without the RNG mechanics. Jeez, I didn't expect to be talking so much about Erika. Well, anyways, that's it for Erika and all the fairy types. Wow, congratulations for making it to the end of the video. I mean, I wasn't expecting this to be an hour-long video, but, oh, what's that? I'm missing one more fairy soul? Oh, that's right, Renee. Jokes aside, I deliberately saved Renee for last because she's one of those souls that isn't doing too well in the majority of the content in Eversoul. Let's figure out what Renee does. Renee is a striker with the gear type of strength. She specializes in single target damage dealing. Renee is one of those souls that has received numerous buffs in the past, so her kit has changed from the way she played out at the beginning of the game. Let's go over Renee's skills now. We'll start off with her passive, since that's the most prominent thing. Her passive is called Gear Up, and what this does is, if Renee has a speed buff, this passive increases her attack and evasion, which is quite significant for her survivability. The next important skill comes from her artifact, which is Burning Up, and what her artifact does is, each time Renee normal attacks, or uses an ability, she gains 1 stack of crit rate increase. And at 10 stacks, it unlocks additional damage from all attacks. This includes normal attacks and skills. And as you rank up her artifact, well, so does her crit rate. Now let's go over the rest of her skills. Next prominent skill would be Magnum Punch. And what this does is Renee damages the nearest enemy, increases her own speed for 14 seconds. At higher levels, this also adds an effect that decreases the enemy's speed by 20% for 10 seconds. This is her only skill that actually improves her speed. Renee's main skill attacks the nearest enemy, knocks them down, and if she's got the Gear Up buff, she does additional damage and stuns the target for 4 seconds. Renee's ultimate deals damage to the nearest enemy. If she's got the Gear Up buff, she deals additional damage. She also punches the heck out of the target. They get yeeted to the back of the stage. At higher levels, this ultimate also gets a 4-second stun. Her final sub ability is actually her only AoE, that deals damage to the nearest target, and any targets in a 45-degree conical area. Decreases all souls' mana who were hit by this attack. She deals additional damage to all targets hit if she has the gear up buff. So to sum everything up, Renee requires speed to keep her gear up buff going and having her consistently do additional damage with her skills. She's another soul like Vivienne that over time she progressively gets stronger the more stacks that she gets. She offers a few utility skills in regards to the mana drain and the speed reduction that she applies to enemies. Now onto the pros and cons. Starting with pros, Renee does offer some utility in regards to her stuns that she offers, and the mana drain and the speed reduction. The other pro is that Renee could offer a lot of damage, depending if she can get those burning up stacks going from her artifact. Now on to cons. The con is that she is very dependent on getting a speed up buff. Currently in Eversoul, there's only 3 souls that provide allies with speed. One of them is Prim, who relies on RNG to apply her buffs, so it's hit or miss whether you're going to get a speed buff or not. The other soul is Rebecca. However, Rebecca's speed is only offered to the ally who's furthest away, so this might not be the case most of the time. And the most successful ally is actually in the fairy type, and that's Vivienne. So when it comes to getting a speed buff, there honestly isn't that much. As a matter of fact, Renee sort of reminds me of Vallana when Vallana came out. There wasn't that many allies who applied bleed, and it wasn't until Garnet that Vallana started to become more stronger because of how Garnet synergizes so well with Vallana. So I feel like Renee's going to be in the same boat as Vallana. The final con has to do with the fact that she has to stack up a buff in order for her to utilize that extra damage that she could potentially get. And while this is great in raids, this is not so good in PvE environments when taking in consideration all the slows and stuns that may be applied to Renee that will inhibit her from getting these stacks. And now with all this in mind, let's go over the ratings quickly. I'm gonna have to give Renee for PvE a 2 out of 5. For single target and boss raid encounters, I'd have to give her a 3 out of 5. She comes in handy in a few boss raids, but she still struggles, and even with the recent buffs, she still isn't capable of doing as much as other souls. I'm sort of struggling to give Renee a rating for PvP, only because I never used her, and going through her skill seems like it may be good on paper because of the evasion that she gets. However, I'd have to still give her a 2 out of 5 in PvP. And it's only because currently there's only Vivienne that actually applies a speed buff consistently to her. I know she just needs one more ally to provide a speed buff. So with all that being said and done, Renee definitely is one of the weaker fairy types. People jokingly in the community consider her fodder fuel. However, when the day comes when there is another soul that provides a speed buff, it's going to be the time that Renee is going to shine. Alright, ladies and gents. Now we're done talking about the fairy types. I believe that the fairy types are stacked with very good souls that can potentially help your party in progressing through the majority of the content in Eversoul. It is the type that I've been using for a large portion of my time playing the game, and it's the type that I find easy to talk about because of my experience with the fairies. So I'm hoping with the knowledge that I've accumulated and the things that I've seen with the fairies that it helps new players, returning players, or even veterans of Eversoul. There's a lot to learn in Eversoul, and as time goes on, I'll also share my knowledge with you all. The next set of guides that I plan on making has to do with the human types, and I might do something in between as well, especially considering this guide took me some time to make. And I had to sift through so many clips from my past streams. So that wraps it all up. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and comment down below what you think about my opinions on the souls that were talked about. Thank you for watching all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye bye.